o'clock.
Within the hour, Presidential Assistant W.J. Ussery is set to meet in Washington with Pennsylvania Governor Milton Schaaf on ways to deal with the strike of independent truckers. Also attending will be representatives of the governors of New Jersey, Massachusetts, Ohio, Delaware, Maryland, Georgia, and Illinois. Good morning. I'm Steve Young reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
CBS News. After saying it would not bow to terrorist threats, it appears that the Greek government has now at least bent its head. I'm Neil Strasser reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Carr and Edward Gibson today are in the midst of their last spacewalk before the return to Earth next Friday. The purpose of the walk is to collect the last of the many photos of the sun and stars taken by outside cameras. But there was also time for some sightseeing as they passed over the West Coast.
Look, there's all the San Joaquin Valley over there. See it? All the Sierras, the San Joaquin Valley, the Salton Sea. Yeah, beautiful. Oh, yeah. So we're out over Arizona, probably Flagstaff. I can see the Grand Canyon from in here. Yeah, there it is. Beautiful. We sure got a pretty country, Houston.
The Skylab astronauts nearing the end of 84 days of circling the Earth. They are retrieving some 38,000 photos in this last spacewalk.
CBS News. Federal officials are now meeting in Washington with Pennsylvania Governor Milton Schaaf and representatives of governors of several other states affected by the strike of independent truckers. Good day. I'm Steve Young reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Carr are in the midst of their last scheduled spacewalk. It started about an hour 40 minutes ago. The crewmen have gone outside the space station to retrieve film cassettes from an array of telescopes.
5 p.m. and time for CBS Radio Network News. Senator Barry Goldwater gives his opinion on who has the inside track for the 1976 Republican presidential nomination. This is Morton Dean reporting, sitting in for Bob Schieffer on the CBS Radio Network. Astronauts Gerald Carr and Dr. Edward Gibson have completed the last spacewalk of the record-breaking mission scheduled to end February 8th. The walk entailed gathering film from sun telescope cameras and taking pictures of the sun, the Earth, and the space station itself. This is Morton Dean, CBS News. 6 p.m. and time for CBS Radio News.
CBS News. An emergency meeting in Washington today of governors, federal legislators, and independent truckers representatives is planning an evening session to work further on trying to hit on a plan to soothe the spreading and sometimes violent trucker slowdown nationwide. I'm Christopher Glenn reporting on the CBS Radio Network. The astronauts stretched out the fourth and final spacewalk of their record-breaking mission a half hour beyond the more than 4 hours scheduled today. Gerald Carr and Edward Gibson retrieved film from exterior cameras and dismantled one plate from the lab's skin, which will be analyzed on Earth to see how it's taken the rigors of 9 months in space. Carr, Gibson, and William Pogue begin battening down the station tomorrow, preparatory to leaving in the Apollo ferry ship for home on Friday.
CBS News. 30 minutes from now, federal and state officials resume their talks in Washington to find a solution to the trucker strike. I'm Bob McNamara reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Astronauts Ed Gibson and Gerald Carr took a 5-hour and 19-minute walk in space today. The excursion is expected to be the last such adventure by American astronauts until at least the 1980s. Gibson, Carr, and William Pogue are in the last few days of their 84th day trip. They're expected to splash down in the Pacific on Friday.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Dan Streeter from New York, and at this hour...
We took a spacewalk today, the last spacewalk expected to occur this decade. For more than 5 hours, the men retrieved cassettes of film from solar telescopes and then took some more pictures of the sun and the Earth's upper atmosphere. The hardest part of the walk was unscrewing a metal plate from the side of their orbiting space station. Scientists will study the plate to see the effects of 9 months of space exposure. The 3 crew members have only a few more research tasks scheduled before they have to get ready for splashdown. That's set for Friday morning in the Pacific Ocean, southwest of San Diego.
Good morning. This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup.
CBS News, the energy chief, Simon, wants motorists to buy more gas, less often. I'm Reed Collins reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
News of the hour, on the hour, from American Information Radio. This is Merrill Muller in Los Angeles, and at this hour...
Lowell Thomas brings the news. From outer space, from Ipoh, Malaya, from Boulder, Colorado, comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas. Now, here is Lowell Thomas and the news.
Good evening, everybody. First, a salute to WIST, Charlotte, North Carolina, newest member of the CBS Radio Network. And the latest news. Last look today at the comet Kohoutek and a few final experiments. Astronauts Carr and Gibson and Pogue were then given time to regroup, preparing for their return on Friday. Earlier, Gibson, viewing the Earth during a final spacewalk, remarked, "Beautiful. I'll be glad to be going back."
CBS News. Another state moves toward mandatory gasoline allocations as the fuel pumps go drier in the Northeast. I'm Stuart Novins reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
Good morning. This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup.
Time at the tone will be 5 p.m. CBS News. The White House agrees to freeze the price of diesel fuel in a bid to pacify independent truckers. I'm Reed Collins reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
News. From outer space, from London, from Bethel, Connecticut, comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas. Now, here is Lowell Thomas and the news.
Good evening, everybody. The 3 Skylab astronauts were undergoing today a series of elaborate biomedical tests from a distance. The doctors attempting across the vast distances between them to determine the precise state of their health after nearly 12 weeks of zero gravity out there. Even in advance, though, the MDs are expressing confidence that our 3 spacemen will easily withstand their return to Earth.
CBS News. The independent truckers have rejected President Nixon's order freezing diesel fuel prices until March 1st. They say their strike will continue. I'm Stuart Novins reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
Skylab 3 crew continued carrying out experiments today, and David Crane takes a look back now at one of the more popular and interesting experiments they have conducted.
The Skylab crews have performed well over 100 different experiments in their workshop, but perhaps none have received the attention and that of an experiment submitted by a high school student, and it was all based on a spider and how that spider would react in zero gravity. Much to everyone's surprise, the spider quickly adapted to its new environment and spun a web. The director of student experiments, Henry Floyd, says the spider gave scientists the data on the absolute effect of zero G on a living organism.
In all probability, this experiment allowed us, in looking at the spiders and the effect of weightlessness on them, in the words of some of the life scientists, such as people up at the North Carolina Department of Mental Health, who have been primarily interested in this experiment, this affords us perhaps to see the absolute effect of weightlessness on a living organism. That is absolute in terms that the effect of weightlessness without all the emotional side effects that might be present in human beings.
In all, 19 high school student experiments were performed successfully by the Skylab crews. I'm David Crane.
That spider experiment, by the way, was not carried out by the current Skylab crew, Skylab 3, completing their 84-day mission. The spider experiment in zero gravity was carried out by Skylab 2.
Good morning. This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup.
3 o'clock, news time. News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Richard Wall from Los Angeles, and at this hour...
Lowell Thomas brings the news. From Detroit, from Houston, from Pittsfield, Massachusetts, comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas. Now, here is Lowell Thomas and the news.
Good evening, everybody.
CBS News. Pennsylvania Governor Milton Schaaf, warning of spreading violence in the trucker strike, has requested an immediate meeting with President Nixon. I'm Jim Kilpatrick, reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Mr. Nixon, however, apparently has no plans to meet with the governor tonight. Deputy Press Secretary Gerald Warren says administration officials are dealing with the situation and meeting with those persons involved. Governor Schaaf, who has been mediating the dispute, telephoned the White House saying the strike could be easily and quickly solved tonight if only we could meet with the president. Governor Schaaf warns that violence is increasing, and even with state police and National Guard troops, the states may not be able to control it. The impact of the trucker strike is growing. In Alabama, Governor George Wallace has for the past 2 days wired President Nixon, urging him to solve the problem immediately. Schools in the northern section of the state are closed because of lack of fuel. The poultry and seafood industry is in trouble. No way to ship their products. Tonight, Governor Wallace made a statewide broadcast urging federal action.
No state in the Union can solve this particular problem. It cannot be solved by officials in Alabama. It cannot be solved by officials in Missouri or any other state. It can only be solved at the national level. And in my judgment, it should have been already solved and can be solved, and the truckers who are involved should be given immediate relief.
Alabama Governor George Wallace. 8 states now have National Guard troops on duty to prevent violence on the highways. More after this.
CBS News. A new nation has been born. The 104,000 people of Grenada are independent now, but many of them don't want it. I'm Stuart Novins reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
It was early to bed and early to rise for Carr, Gibson, and Pogue in what technically was called the circadian shift night. That's a complicated word, but simply means that it's time to get their bodies readjusted to the day-night cycle back on Earth. At about 9 o'clock Eastern Time, they went to bed last night. Today, the last full one of the mission, will be a small mishmash. Reveille came at about 5 a.m. Eastern Time. At 2 p.m., it will be back to bed. And at 10, up once again. From that point tonight, they'll stay up non-stop through return maneuvers tomorrow, splashdown late Friday morning Eastern Time, and if all goes well, midday Friday, we'll see them on board the prime recovery ship New Orleans. What do you feel if you're reaching the end of the world's longest space mission? Well, one flight controller said the crew feels nostalgia that it's over, but they're glad to come home. Steve Young, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Good morning. This is Dallas Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup. Reports from the Johnson Space Center.
This is their last full day aboard the space station, which was billed as having all the comforts of home. That was more or less true during the last 83 days of this flight, and for the 6 crewmen who preceded Carr, Gibson, and Pogue on the 2 previous missions. But today, the spacemen will have to be a little stoic. Almost everything has been shut down inside the workshop, and they can't even wash their hands. Everything that can be turned off has been, except the lights and air conditioning. Deactivation in space jargon, packing to go home in ordinary lingo. The command ship, which will ferry them earthward, is already crammed except for a couple of rolls of film still to be stuffed in. And after being on man's longest journey off Earth, the usually taciturn crew is beginning to sound excited about their return. Steve Young, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
The helicopter carrier New Orleans is on station in the Pacific.
Time at the tone will be 5 p.m. CBS News. The independent truckers are mulling over the government's offer to end that scattered boycott. I'm Reed Collins reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Richard Wall from Los Angeles, and at this hour...
Lab 3 is coming to an end. At the moment, astronauts Gerald Carr, Edward Gibson, and Bill Pogue are sleeping. Johnson Space Center spokesman Terry White gives us the details.
Well, the crew's asleep until about 8:30 Houston time this evening, when they'll wake up and prepare for final closeout of the space station and getting into the command module, undocking at 5:34 tomorrow morning, and start their entry preparations with the final retrofire burn coming at 9:35 on Friday morning, Houston time. Splashdown at 10:17, also Houston time, about 170 miles, nautical miles southwest of San Diego.
The astronauts are bringing back with them more than 1,700 pounds of experiments and data gathered on the record-breaking 84-day mission.
Lowell Thomas brings the news. From Panama City, from Seoul, Korea, from Amarillo, Texas, comes today's news as reported by America's foremost newscaster, Lowell Thomas. Now, here is Lowell Thomas and the news.
Good evening, everybody. Joe Carr, Ed Gibson, and Bill Pogue were buttoning up their Skylab space station, getting set to return to Earth after nearly 12 weeks in orbit. Splashdown in the Pacific, as you know, set for 11:17 tomorrow morning.
Carr, Pogue, and Gibson are packing up to head for a splashdown in the Pacific tomorrow morning. Eric Severod's observations after this message.
CBS News, Navy clerk Charles Radford said tonight he took secret National Security Council information from the White House and gave it to the men who asked for it, 2 Navy admirals. I'm Stuart Novins reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Dan Streeter from New York, and at this hour is coming to an end. The astronauts were awakened about an hour and a half ago to begin their last day in space. From the Skylab News Center, correspondent Merrill Miller reports.
The early call was to get at a prepared breakfast, suit up, and transfer themselves into the Apollo taxicab. The astronauts will lock up Skylab's door and abandon it at 6:34 tomorrow morning. They will fly around for a last look at the laboratory in which 9 men have made historic scientific studies for 170 days in space, and then the astronauts come home. The carrier New Orleans is ready 175 miles southwest of San Diego for splashdown scheduled at 11:17 tomorrow morning. Merrill Miller, ABC News, Skylab News Center.
Hear live coverage of the Skylab splashdown tomorrow morning on most of these information network stations.
CBS News, President Nixon has taken the first step in communicating with the House Judiciary Committee's impeachment investigation. I'm Stuart Novins reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Astronauts are scheduled for splashdown in the Pacific tomorrow morning at about 11:17 Eastern Time. thus ending their 84-day mission, the longest space mission ever made by man. Weather conditions in the pickup area are expected to be favorable, except for the possibility of fairly rough seas, 5 to 7 feet. The space headquarters in Houston says it sees no problems. Stuart Novins, CBS News.
Gerald Carr and Bill Pogue are scheduled to splash down in the Pacific Ocean off San Diego a few minutes after 10 tomorrow morning, marking the end of their record-setting 84-day visit to the orbiting space station. David Crane, KTRH newsman, has been covering the mission from the beginning. He's on the phone right now, and he's going to tell you a little bit about what's going on out at the Johnson Space Center right before the splashdown. David?
All right, thank you very much, Jerry. And it's not just me standing by with me. There's Tony Longo from Rockwell International. These are the people that build the Apollo command module. This is going to be the craft that's going to return the astronauts. Tony, what stage are we in right now?
Well, the crew got up about 8:40 this evening and started completing some of the deactivation of the workshop, some of the odds that they had to do. And now they're in the process of cranking up the command module system, like repressurizing the systems for the big engine that'll boost them back in. And pretty soon they'll be transferring. Right now they're using power from the orbital workshop. Pretty soon they'll close that out and go on batteries. In the command module, they'll be purely on command module power. Just preparing. And they are, one or two of them are in there, and they're doing this work, getting it prepared to turn on the system, and leading up to undocking and coming back home again.
Right, so they're in the stage right now, taking their last look inside the workshop before closing it out. And closing it out till, who knows when again, perhaps mid-1975, the Apollo Soyuz test project crew will be visiting once again America's space station Skylab. Once again, undocking will come at about 5:30 in the morning, and splashdown set for about 10:17 tomorrow morning. Don't forget, live broadcast of splashdown beginning around 5:30 tomorrow morning, all the way through splashdown on KTRH. Jerry?
Okay, thank you, David.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Richard Wall from Los Angeles, and at this hour, making preparations for the end of their record-long space flight, Carr, Pogue, and Gibson are to return to Earth at 11:17 a.m. Eastern Time, and you can hear live coverage of the splashdown on many of these Information Radio Network stations.
Today, from a 34.5 million mile journey, they are the Skylab astronauts, Carr, Gibson, and Pogue, who've been orbiting the Earth for 84 days collecting scientific information. They'll begin their descent shortly after 6:30. Preparations are underway at this hour. Mission Control reports on weather in the recovery zone in the Pacific off San Diego.
Landing zone weather is experiencing partly cloudy skies and rather strong surface winds, 15 to 18 knots, and sea surface is 5 to 7 foot waves. Temperature has gone down since yesterday. It's now about 58 degrees.
Splashdown is scheduled for 11:17 a.m. Eastern Time. NBC News will provide live coverage over most of these stations. More news after this.
Time.
CBS News. After 84 days and 34 million miles in space, this is Splashdown Day for the Skylab 3 astronauts. Good morning. This is Dallas Townsend reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Gerald Carr, Edward Gibson, and William Pogue, whose record flight provided knowledge that may contribute to the exploration of Mars, are due to guide their spaceship to splashdown about 5 hours from now in the Pacific, 176 miles southwest of San Diego. Steve Young reports from the Johnson Space Center in Houston on final preparations.
Carr, Gibson, and Pogue are in their spacesuits now inside the command ship making last preparations before casting off from their home away from home. They could awake about 8 hours, a long last day, before returning to Earth after the record-breaking flight. And there have been few words between them and officials on ground. A computer problem developed this morning, not up there with the space station or command ship, but here on ground, what they call a dropout. As a result, the display in mission control shows the command ship stuck somewhere over the U.S. But it's just a pictorial problem,
won't affect actual return, and they expect to clear it up. Weather in the recovery area is good, 5 to 7 foot seas. The astronauts scheduled to undock from Skylab about 35 minutes from now. Steve Young, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
The latest on the trucker strike after this message.
Coming down about 10 past the hour of 10 o'clock this morning, so come in, David.
Good day. Good morning, Ronnie.
All right. I got you on now, David. Come on.
Ronnie. And we're standing by here. It's already been a long day for the Skylab crew. Gerald Carr, Ed Gibson, and Bill Polk. They've been up since 9 o'clock last night, getting ready for splashdown this morning. A long day for them, bringing to an end an extremely long mission, 84 days in space. Standing by with me throughout the day, Frank Masato from Rockwell International, the builders of the Apollo Command Module, the ferry craft for the Skylab mission, the craft that's used to take the crew up to and back from our orbiting workshop. Frank, I think everything's going pretty well so far today, hasn't it? Check down this?
Yes, everything's right on schedule, David.
And we should be.
Okay, we're undocked. We released the captain.
Now they're undocked right now.
A little too soon. Caught on the capture latch. You said to release them and thrust our way off.
That's Gerald Carr there, I believe.
That's correct.
Okay, copy. So they're undocked, and what's the next maneuver now, Frank?
The next maneuver they'll do is to begin their fly around. They're going to do a 180-degree fly around the Swiss, that is the orbital workshop, and take photos to assess the status of the external parts of the orbital workshop.
Any specific things they'll be looking at?
Well, we'll be looking at the parts that were not deployed and then deployed manually by Skylab 1 crew. They will also be just checking for any damage that might have been done by meteorites or any other outgassing of the mission, discolorations from the sun and such as that.
All right, so our standpoint right now is that everything still looks good for splashdown. No difficulty so far. The command module and everything looks good there.
That's absolutely right, David. Everything looks fine.
Okay. Ronnie will be standing by, bringing you further report on splashdown, and this is the last manned mission for quite some time.
All right, thanks a lot, David, and we'll hear from you later as we get an up-to-date report as to what's happening on splashdown later on this morning, and it will start at 10 minutes past the hour of 10 o'clock, but we'll have up-to-the-minute news coverage on that on this station this morning.
I thank you, Jack. A half hour ago, on schedule, the Apollo Service Command Module undocked from the workshop. They said goodbye to their home of the last 84 days. And standing by with me this morning, Frank Masato from Rockwell International, prime contractors, the builders of the Apollo Command Module. Frank spent almost 8 years in mission control in the flight support room, watching the spacecraft through all of the Apollo missions. Frank, I think everything's gone on time this morning.
Everything's going excellently this morning, David. Couldn't ask for a better separation and pre-entry maneuver.
All right, what are we looking at right now? We've got a burn coming up here to drop further away from the spacecraft, right?
That's correct. In about 10 minutes, we're going to fire the RCS jets and cause the command module, service module, to separate from the orbital workshop. This is in preparation for SPS shaping, which is the first maneuver, which is part of the deorbit sequence.
Okay, Frank, also there was an interesting comment earlier, Jack. During the fly-around, after they first undocked, they maneuvered their spacecraft. Gerald Carr and crew maneuvered the spacecraft, and they got a total look at the entire workshop. And I think Carr's comment there was most interesting, Frank, when he said, wow, that baby really looks like it's been worked over.
That's right. It was most interesting. Part of his comments were in reference also to a fold in the accordion pleated sail, which had apparently opened up or split. That, of course, is of no problem. He probably had a lot of reference in that into his comment was to the fact that it was discolored from the sun, among other things.
And of course, they're bringing back a piece of that for scientists to study here on the ground to determine how that sail, which was deployed by the second crew, the sail there to protect the workshop from the sun's rays. Everything looks good at this point, Jack. We're still looking for splashdown at 10:17 this morning.
Townsend with the CBS World News Roundup. The Skylab 3 astronauts are now in the semi-final stages of their return to Earth after a record-breaking journey in space. One of the main preliminaries occurred this morning, and we'll hear about it from Reed Collins at CBS News Space Headquarters in New York.
South of Bermuda, sealed in the return ship, Carr, Gibson, and Pogue cast off from the workshop, which had been their home for 84 days. And it was a trifle difficult, something like working a rusty latch.
Group, you with us?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're on dock. We released the docking extend release a little too soon and caught on the capture latches. Had to release them and thrust our way off.
Okay, copy.
They flew around the huge barrel of the workshop, noting the two sails stretched across it by previous crews who had repaired the damage done during the launch last May. And they said it's been a good home. Then they pulsed away a safe distance. Later, over Guam, they ignited the service engine of their ship, dropping their orbit to 104 miles at its lowest point. From that plateau, on the fringe of atmosphere, they'll make the final dive toward the waiting recovery vessel 170 miles off San Diego, California. This is Reed Collins, CBS News Space Headquarters in New York.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is George Engel from New York, and at this hour, the Skylab astronauts are ready to come home. Winding up their record 84-day mission, the crewmen separated their taxi capsule from the workshop this morning, and Mission Commander Jerry Carr radioed this report back to Houston.
We're on dock. We released the docking extend release a little too soon and caught on the capture latches. Had to release them and thrust our way off.
Carr piloted the command ship around the vacant workshop for a final check, then made this observation to communicator Bob Crippen at Mission Control.
It looks like we're going to scrape the ground. We're getting so low.
You've been used to flying up there pretty high.
Almost looks like looking out the cockpit of a T-38.
Carr and his fellow astronauts are due to return in about 2 hours. You'll hear live coverage of the splashdown in the Pacific over many of these American information stations.
9 a.m.
CBS News. Little more than an hour to go now before the Skylab astronauts return to Earth. This is Dallas Townsend reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Reed Collins at CBS News Space Headquarters in New York has the latest on the final stage of the Skylab flight.
Flying in their command ship, Carr, Gibson, and Pogue have made the last sweep across the United States and will deorbit north of Singapore, then fall all the way across the Pacific to their landing point just off San Diego. During re-entry, they must rely on 2 rings of command module control rockets to maintain their attitude. And there is an indication now that one of those 2 rings, number 1, is getting tired.
Possibility of a leak in the command module reaction control system. Ring number 2. The best possibility now is that it is a helium leak at the source. Helium pressure was noted dropping. However, the possibility does remain that it could be a propellant leak. It's a slow leak. Propellant leak would also cause the helium pressure to go down.
The latest command from Mission Control is come in on ring number 1, leave ring number 2 alone unless absolutely needed. An hour from now, they'll be using ring 1, and they'll know for certain. Reed Collins, CBS News Space Headquarters, New York.
Bob Kane with a progress report on the return of Ed Gibson, Gerald Carr, and William Pogue from NBC's Jay Barbary at the Kennedy Space Center.
The last crew of astronauts to work aboard Skylab are 1 hour and 17 minutes from ending their record 84 days in Earth orbit. And for their splashdown, Mission Control told them they would find the perfect weather. Visibility 10 miles. Wind is out of the north-northeast at 10 knots. Up 1 foot waves on 3 foot swells.
Hey, that's good landlubber weather there.
It's always nice in Southern California. The astronauts' landing target is on the Pacific, 175 miles from San Diego, where they should reach Earth after traveling 34.5 million miles.
NBC News will provide live coverage of the splashdown on many of these NBC stations.
In 21 minutes from now, with the latest on the mission, here is ABC's Merrill Muller at the Skylab News Center.
The astronauts are scheduled to be separating their little landing ship from the big service module at this moment. They reported an excellent rocket firing, which slowed them down and started the fiery dive toward the landing zone San Diego. Just before that final act over Southeast Asia, astronaut Jerry Carr got this word to come home from ground communicator Bob Crippen in Houston.
Skylab, Houston, we are go for deorbit entry.
Roger, thank you. So are we.
I think that's an understatement.
Everything appears to be going smoothly for Skylab astronauts' safe return. Merrill Muller, ABC News, Skylab News Center.
You can hear live coverage of the splashdown over many of these American contemporary stations.
10 a.m. CBS News. 50 seconds from now, the Skylab astronauts will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere on their way home. I'm Charles Osgood on the CBS Radio Network. Reed Collins reports on the sequence of events.
24 minutes ago, 100 miles high over Southeast Asia, the astronauts Carr, Gibson, and Pogue performed the irreversible burn, deorbiting, descending toward a place just 175 miles off the coast of California. Now they have separated from the service module. They're coming in on just one of two redundant control rocket systems. One of the two rocket rings has leaked propellant. Bob Crippen of Mission Control gave them some last-minute instructions as they hurtled across the Pacific and down toward the atmosphere.
If for any reason you run into a Ring 1 problem, which we don't anticipate, we would like to go ahead and use what is left out of Ring 1 or Ring 2 to go ahead and set it up for a rolling entry.
Understand. If we have a problem with Ring 1, we'll go use what's left to set up rolling re-entry.
That's firm. Also, in descent, during the refresh, if for any reason you could get a fishy or an acid smell, we recommend using the O2 mask.
And so they may come in wearing oxygen masks if that leak gets into the cabin. Right now they've hit the atmosphere. They're out of radio contract, flying in now on one ring and a prayer. Reed Collins, CBS News, Space Headquarters, New York.
We'll have more news in a moment.
Loud and clear, how many?
Okay, read you loud and clear. We're doing fine.
Very good. Sounds great. Hey, one thing we would like is another reading on Ring 2, helium source and manifold pressure, if you could, please.
Reading about 1900. Yep.
And one of the reasons they wanted to know about the helium ring and the pressure was that one of the two redundant rocket control systems with which they guide themselves coming back to Earth was discovered to have sprung a leak in its propellant. This only about an hour before re-entry. They came in with just one ring operating, and apparently the one ring they did have worked fine because the men are fine, and now the engineers in Mission Control are still sort of troubleshooting the problem. Coming down, it's interesting to note through that blackout period, through the immense heat of taking out all of the energy put back into an orbiting object, they generated some 86,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. That much was dissipated from the spacecraft, and Mission Control calculates in this day of energy shortage, that's enough to have lighted the entire city of Los Angeles for 1 minute and 44 seconds. All of that energy has been dissipated now, and they should be very shortly getting out on the multiplicity of the shrouds and the parachutes that will finally loft them onto the Pacific Ocean about 170 miles from the coast of San Diego. It was a long fall into daylight, actually, begun over Southeast Asia when they deorbited. About mid-Pacific, they got rid of the service module, and then they were flying alone as they had begun that long trip 84 days ago in the small command module with one of the re-entry rings, as we mentioned, apparently disabled due to a propellant leak. Let's join them aloft as they keep falling and keep falling.
Copy.
Okay, the rings are unreefed. Open fall. Looking good, Trip. What a beautiful sight.
The reference to Crip is Bob Crippen, the capsule communicator.
Crew confirms main chute deployment, and they have unreefed.
Go ahead with your transmission.
Let's go now to the site of the re-entry itself, where those parachutes may be in view. The recovery vessel, the New Orleans, and newsman Bill Larson.
New Orleans, the recovery ship, that magnificent sight that we all await. Those three big 83.5-foot mean parachutes bringing the command module safely to the splashdown point here in the Pacific. All three are out fully. They're orange and white. They're bringing that command module down at about 32 feet per second. That works out to about 22 miles an hour. A very gentle and cheerful ride. The astronauts report everything looks good. That relay from NASA. And in just about 3 or 4 minutes, they'll hit that splashdown point. The USS New Orleans, the recovery ship, will begin picking up speed to about 10 knots, moving into that splashdown point. If all goes as it has in some of the practice sessions, we should have the astronauts on board within about 30 minutes from splashdown. It's a beautiful, beautiful morning here in the Pacific, about 176 miles southwest of San Diego. And I'm sure the astronauts will welcome this type of a morning. The seas are very, very calm. There should be very, very little rocking motion. The 4 helicopters, actually 5 helicopters are up for this recovery, but 4 of them should begin very shortly, already on their way, in fact, into that splashdown point. They will stay off about 2 miles for a couple of minutes after splashdown because there is some other debris coming down. Debris from the apex cover, debris from shroud lines, from drogue chutes, things like that were released earlier before the main chutes opened up. Securing that command module. The report from the astronauts seems to be a good one. They all seem to be in good condition. On the one helicopter, the main helicopter, on the main helicopter that goes in to recover the astronauts, there is a doctor on board in a wetsuit. That was in case any of the astronauts was hurt. Looks like now he will not be needed. He's Deputy Crew Surgeon Dr. Edward Bouchard. He will be coming back to the ship now, and he'll be changing out of his wetsuit and into his normal clothes so that he can be at the elevator at the ship to welcome the astronauts when they step out of the command module. This is Bill Larson on board the USS New Orleans.
And as they have been descending, everything seems to be reported good as far as the astronauts and their condition is concerned. They're going to put on a set of little... They're going to be putting on something that will help the return of gravitational force as far as their long, weightless bodies are concerned, and something resembling a G-suit that pilots wore during World War II. We're going back now to the recovery ship New Orleans and newsman Bill Larson, who is standing by.
3, 2, 1. The relay from NASA, they're talking to the astronauts, and they all seem to be very happy. The command module now floating down on those 3 big main chutes. It should be at about 2,000 feet, and we should get splashed down very shortly. The Navy Sea King helicopters moving into position now so that they can be in on this recovery and make sure that the command module is secured and riding comfortably in the water. On board the main recovery helicopter, Recovery 1, it's being commanded by Commander Bud Parkington of Chula Vista, California's co-pilot, Lieutenant J.G. John Winter of Boone, Louisiana. They'll be dropping the first 2 astronauts into the splashdown point to put on the sea anchor on the command module. And those first 2 frogmen in will be Peter Tomies of New York City and Jack Holly of Westlake, Louisiana. They'll be putting on a sea anchor to slow down the drift of the command ship. Now, just a few hundred feet above the Pacific Ocean. Splashdown, that's it. A beautiful, beautiful splashdown, and it looks from our point as though the command ship is in what's called, the command module is in what's called a stable 1 position. That means it is upright. There's been about a 50-50 chance in the past missions that the command module would be upside down, in which case the astronauts would have to inflate 3 balloons and upright it. But at this point, from our vantage point, which would be, I would say, about 5 miles from the splashdown point right now, 4.5 miles, it looks as though the command ship, the command module, is in stable 1 position. NASA has reported that the astronauts say they're in good condition. They are happy. The helicopters now beginning to move into position, three of them. The recovery helicopter, the swim helicopter, which is actually a backup helicopter for the recovery helicopter. There's a backup team of swimmers in case the first helicopter couldn't get in or in case something happened. Stable 2 is the report from NASA. That means, although it looked like Stable 1's in here, that means the command module did end up upside down as it splashed down. This is not a particularly dangerous situation. It just means that the astronauts will have to inflate the inflation bag, the inflation balloon, three of them, on top of the command module. That will upright the command module. At this point, in Stable 2 position, we cannot get any type of communications from the astronauts in the spacecraft because, of course, all their antennas are water. Helicopters moving into position, particularly the recovery helicopter itself. This inflation technique may take a couple of minutes to get the spacecraft uprighted. What's at right now? We do have 3 helicopters in the vicinity. At this point, it's still a Stable 2 position, but riding very well. That's what NASA says about the command module, about the spaceship at this point. But it may be a little bit of an uncomfortable position right now for the Skylab astronauts.
We're losing some of our contact with Bill Larson aboard the aircraft carrier New Orleans. It's probably because it's maneuvering to get closer to the spacecraft itself on the water, and the antenna angle is changing. Mission Control occasionally gets a report back through its own hard ground system, and we'll be listening for any word we get from the astronauts on that line, too. In Houston, by the way, in Mission Control, the old traditional bouquet of a dozen red roses arrived today at the now Johnson Space Center, right on time, coming from a mysterious person who signs herself only Miss Cindy Diane, with the usual congratulations to this latest returning crew on its accomplishments. And those in Mission Control always put the dozen red roses in a bouquet prominently displayed, and it sort of has been a good luck omen to them as well as to many other support people there. She says she formerly lived in Montreal, Canada, now lives someplace in Pennsylvania. But of course, in this global sort of event, it probably doesn't matter too much the exact source of the roses. The men are, as we have heard from the helicopter aircraft carrier, the New Orleans, a little bit upside down. That's happened before. They have not had any ups or downs, really, relative to their own bodies now for about 84 days. They know what the return of the Earth's grip is to them. They're wearing, as we say, those little G-suits that provide some artificial pressure to their lower extremities, their legs. They'll inflate those before they get out, and to see if that doesn't tend to offset the fainting periods that returning astronauts have sometimes suffered when they stand upright. We'll be listening to Mission Control also, and getting the latest word. We want to absolutely confirm that the men are okay.
As the command module reaches Stable 1, we should get communications between the crew and the recovery forces.
As Jack Riley, the public affairs officer, just said, they'll be able to talk once they get their antenna back upright out of the water. Back in the Apollo days, we had one come in upside down, and nobody could really figure out what might be the matter. It wasn't anything the matter. It was just a question of inflating those big balloons on the apex end of the little cone and getting it to float right. This returning spacecraft in the numbers game weighed a little more than 12,000 pounds. It was about 2 pounds lighter than the last returning one from Skylab. Now we hear from the helicopters that the command module will stabilize. In fact, you heard an astronaut say, look at him chopping up the water. He can again see out his watery window, and he can see the result of the helicopter blades overhead as they hover and as they whip the waters upon which the command module now safely floats. A lot of this being communicated back through orbiting aircraft who don't orbit very high and don't really put out much of a signal, but it does provide communications, and it's the only thing that we have that tells us something. Probably can't hear exactly what is being said, but you can get the general tone of it when you hear that the men are excited and their tone's elevated and they're okay. They have no anxiety. In fact, they're just very, very happy to be back here on terra firma after 84 long days. Record days, 34.5 million miles they traveled, and now they have that slowdown problem that all Earthlings have to suffer and sometimes enjoy, the problems of simply getting around here on Earth. Since they have been gone, we have experienced more problems in that particular vein, I think, than anybody recognized back when they were lifted off in the middle of November. But they must learn about that. They must reacquaint themselves with those families, those large broods of children. One astronaut car has 6, Gibson 4, and Pogue 3. A lot of things to really get caught back up on in terms of family life, and perhaps one of the secrets that the wives have been holding from the men is the fact that they know where a gas station's open. At any rate, the men are back, they're safe, they're well, and they're shortly going to be winched aboard the rescue ship, the USS New Orleans, about 175 miles off the sunny coast of California. For now, that's the return and the end, really, of the Skylab program. I'm Reed Collins, CBS News, Space Headquarters, New York.
The Skylab astronauts are back on Earth after 84 days in space. ABC's Merrill Muller reports on their return from the Skylab News Center.
Astronauts Carr, Gibson, and Pogue all report themselves in good health with slightly low pulse rates. That's a double surprise after their record-breaking work in the Skylab space station and their dive back to Earth from the Apollo. The spaceship landed upside down, but quickly righted itself. Recovery operations are on schedule. The landing was only about 3 miles from the carrier and 11 seconds early. The astronauts, by doctor's orders, are to be chairlifted from the Apollo to the medical lab for their first complete physical examinations after 84 days in the weightlessness of space. Merrill Muller, ABC News, Skylab News Center.
CBS News. The Skylab astronauts are safely back on Earth. Their long mission successfully ended. A thrilling story all the way. I'm Richard C. Huttelet reporting on the CBS Radio Network. Splashdown came smoothly 43 minutes ago. Reed Collins reports from CBS Space Headquarters in New York.
The spacecraft came down within view of the recovery ship New Orleans, 170 miles off San Diego. Carr, Pogue, and Gibson reported they were in good shape, and there was more than the usual relief because during the last revolution prior to entry, it was discovered that one of the 2 rocket control systems on the command ship was leaking. Instructions went up not to use that system and to put on oxygen masks if that propellant leaked into the cabin. The men, weightless for 84 days, remain aboard the command spacecraft. Moments ago, it and they were hoisted aboard ship. They're wearing G-suits to add pressure to the lower body and lessen the risk of blacking out under the unaccustomed pull of gravity. More than a decade of active United States manned presence in space is coming to an end. Reed Collins, CBS News, Space Headquarters, New York.
The trucking story in 1 minute.
Bob Kane with a report just in from reporter Bill Larson aboard the recovery ship.
The command module carrying astronauts Edward Gibson, William Pogue, and Gerald Carr now safely on board the USS New Orleans. It's on what's called the aft starboard elevator. It's resting on a big blue dolly. There's no attempt at the moment to open the hatch on the spacecraft. But the latest reports we've had from the astronauts still inside that they are in fine condition. It's been a storybook recovery so far this morning. Through the atmosphere, the main chute opened beautifully, drifting the spacecraft down to very, very light seas, so there's no rocking and rolling motion at all for the Skylab astronauts on their return from some 84 days in space. A new record for man in space and bringing back many, many experiments that will hopefully tell scientists what is happening on Earth about the future of some of the things that we can do with our Earth. Bill Larson on board the USS New Orleans.
They indicated they're in good shape after an 84-day mission. Commander Carr said it's good to be back. More news after this.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Steve Powers from New York, and at this hour, the Skylab 3 astronauts are safely aboard the recovery carrier New Orleans. They were aboard the ship only 39 minutes after a pinpoint landing in the Pacific less than 3.5 miles from the recovery carrier. Doctors say the astronauts apparently are in fine shape after their record-breaking 84 days plus in space and after this morning's successful re-entry and return to Earth.
CBS News. President Nixon has won a court fight with the Senate's Watergate Committee over subpoenaed White House tapes. I am Reed Collins reporting on the CBS radio network. Crews back on Earth after splashdown in the Pacific about 3 miles from the recovery carrier New Orleans. Doctors say the astronauts, Carr, Gibson, and Pogue, are a little bit shaky after 84 weightless days, but otherwise apparently in fine shape. The men are to remain aboard the New Orleans until Sunday undergoing medical tests. More in a minute.
And the time will be 5 p.m.
CBS News. While many independent truckers are on record saying they are opposed to new offers to get their trucks rolling again, growing numbers of drivers are reported back on the road. Federal labor mediator W.J. Ussery said today truck operations have increased 20% in the last day. I'm Dick Reeves, substituting for Reed Collins on the CBS radio network. Breaking Skylab mission ended today. Astronauts Carr, Pogue, and Gibson splashed down safely in the Pacific and were picked up by the recovery ship New Orleans, 176 miles off San Diego, California. The last leg of the space odyssey, not without incident. The Skylab astronauts had to overcome a leaky rocket system 2 hours before splashdown. The problem forced the astronauts to return home with just one thruster system in operation. Today's splashdown was the first one not covered live on television. But the event was marked by President Nixon, who called the mission one of the scientifically most productive endeavors in human history.
News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is Richard Wall from Los Angeles, and at this hour, the astronauts say they're glad to be home after 84 days on their space mission, and doctors on the recovery ship New Orleans in the Pacific say Carr, Pogue, and Gibson are in good shape following their record flight. This is Information Radio News.
This is The World Tonight. Good evening, I'm Douglas Edwards, CBS News. Most forgot that they were even up there. That's how routine space flights have become. But today, the men from Skylab, Carr, Pogue, and Gibson, came back to Earth with a space helmet full of records. Just for starters, they were in space for 84 days, 1 hour, 16 minutes. They made a bullseye landing in the Pacific, and one of them said, "Good to be back," and another one said, "Glad to be home." No ceremony, nothing except handshakes and congratulations aboard the recovery ship New Orleans. The first medical evaluation sounds good. The first technical evaluation, likewise.
As far as I'm concerned, Skylab's greatest achievement was to prove beyond a doubt that there is no limit in our space research, that just like anything else that America sets out to do, the limit is only our resolve, not our ability to do work, not the ability of men to work, and not our technical knowledge.
That evaluation from William Schneider, Skylab Program Director. And now a report from Reed Collins in our New York Space Headquarters.
Buried in the miles of computer readout and hidden in the plate-on-plate of Skylab film, there may be some basic secrets of how our sun creates the energy which has made and sustains this Earth. That will be Skylab's legacy, as well as proof that men can endure literally for months without their planet's pull. And here we close out the United States' first era of ambitious manned space flight. A dozen years of programs, sometimes overlapping and dovetailing, that took us to the moon and back and finally built us this first real space station. True, there is the joint Soviet-American flight of next year, but that is a political demonstration, not founded in any real scientific or technological purpose. As far as U.S. technology is concerned, it is in fact a step backward. The first age of space exploration has ended, and the new age begins when the space shuttle soars aloft in the early 1980s. At that time, with luck, the old hulk of the Skylab station may be found, and a new generation of astronauts
may one day open its hatch and say, so this is what it was like back when it all began. This is Reed Collins, CBS News, Space Headquarters, New York.
This is John Grimes for American Information Radio in New York with World Wrap-Up, the sounds of the news on this Friday, February 8th, 1974. In the top of the news, more rigs roll. Federal court torpedoes Watergate Committee. Skylab ends an era. We'll have those and other stories in a moment. Floats empty and quiet in space tonight. Astronauts Gibson, Pogue, and Carr, Skylab's final crew, are safe aboard a carrier in the Pacific after splashdown this morning. In Houston, Dr. Royce Hawkins was asked about the crew's physical condition.
They were shaky. I don't think that they appear to or sound to be any worse off than what we saw with the Skylab 3 crew when they returned. If you can remember how they looked, I would imagine that this crew looks very, very similar.
Astronaut physician Dr. Royce Hawkins.
CBS News, Senator Charles Percy talks about Watergate and about the presidency in 1976. I'm Stuart Novins reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
Carr, Gibson, and Pogue are scheduled to arrive back in Houston at Ellington Air Force Base on Sunday. At an after-recovery news briefing, Skylab Mission Director Bill Snyder talked about some of the mission's accomplishments.
Skylab has been a multidiscipline facility, and it's been something different to each individual. Each discipline, each scientist has looked upon Skylab as having meaning in a different area. As far as I'm concerned, Skylab's greatest achievement was to prove beyond a doubt that there is no limit in our space research, that just like anything else that America sets out to do, the limit is only our resolve, not our ability to do work, not the ability of men to work, and not our technical knowledge.
With today's completion of the $2.6 billion Skylab project, what's to become of the orbiting lab that's housed 3 sets of astronauts? Reed Collins has the answer to that.
The Skylab laboratory itself now becomes a relic. On Saturday, Mission Control will command its power off, its lights turned down, and drifting along 275 miles up, that huge barrel will continue on until the early 1980s, when it will slip back within the clutch of atmosphere, begin to glow, and finally burn. It's possible that men will revisit her as divers do those sunken ships. A package of sample foods and films was left clinging to one of the struts before men finally abandoned the workshop. They talk of going to that old workshop in connection with the 1975 joint meeting in space with the Russians, or docking the space shuttle with that old relic of the 1970s. Whatever, on a dark night, if a star winks, it may be that great abandoned space station just passing by, the Flying Dutchman of the space age. Reed Collins, CBS News, Space Headquarters in New York.
12 noon. CBS News is next.
CBS News. President Nixon's proposal for national health insurance has been supported by the administration and criticized by the author of an alternate plan. Good day, I'm Steve Young reporting on the CBS Radio Network.
Houston early this evening after Friday's splashdown, marking the end of their record-setting 84-day mission through space. Charles Miller reports.
The wives of the Skylab 3 astronauts set a record waiting for their husbands to return from space, and they're still waiting. Gerald Carr, William Pogue, and Edward Gibson splashed down Friday in the Pacific Ocean, climaxing a record 84-day scientific voyage in space. But it will be Sunday night before their wives get to the space travelers in person again, and the temporary space widows didn't even get to see the splashdown as it happened on television, which didn't give live coverage to the end of the space mission. Julia Gibson said, "I was very disappointed because here it's the last flight. We got good scientific information and nobody's interested enough to carry it on television." Joanne Carr, glancing at a calendar a neighbor had made with 84 days on it, each marked off, said, "They put so many sad things on television, and here our country does something to really be proud of, and they don't even show it."
The Skylab 3 families, possibly buoyed by the experience of previous astronaut returns, seem to take the day's activities more routinely. About 25 friends, including several astronauts, gathered at the car home to listen to the return over a space agency squawk box. This is Charles Miller.